When I think about wiring an amp rack, I kind of break it down in my head before I do anything. That way I can kind of think about my lengths and, so I can pre-cut some wires. I like to keep it to where I'm not wasting a ton of wire. So when it came to wiring this amp rack, I had thought, like, oh, it's on the roof. It's, everything needs to be a lot longer, which turned out to be the complete opposite. I ended up with a lot of scrap wire, and it's a lot less than you think. Like, most of the stuff either ran through the headliner and down, or ran down a B-pillar and back to the amp location. So everything, it turned out to be a lot shorter, and it actually turned out to be a lot easier. The only pain, the pain in the ass part was everything is above you, and if you're unfit and unhealthy like me, your arms get tired trying to screw an amplifier in upside down.
I had to tape off every section, or every piece that I was going to lay fiberglass on. Draw out where I wanted the trim pieces to be so that I knew that I had straight lines and reference lines and all that kind of stuff. Use fiberglass to take a mold of the headliner as it sits flat. When I had the structure for the base of the fiberglass trim piece made, then I just trimmed it all out. Laid it back down on there, taped off again, stretched off some grill cloth. And then completed the top section of it with another 4 layers of fiberglass mat. That gave me an entire piece that I could start to work with as far as the trim goes. This piece was going to mount to the headliner over the amp rack, and then the actual cover trim piece that goes and sets into that would, screw in, and so there's kind of a layering of all the pieces is kind of what I was thinking of with this. At this point, I hadn't really decided on what the design was going to be, and later I would take that from the vehicle.
So once Dan had the metal frame structure built and mounted, I now had basically a blank canvas to work on so that I can design my board, figure out the room that I have, and orientate the amps however I want. That's the nice thing about working with Dan is we can kind of, I don't have to tell him like, hey, I want it like this, and then I expect that to be done. Like, I can pretty much, we both kind of think very similar. So I don't ever have to worry about those kind of things. It's not like these long-winded explanations as to why I would like, the board to be like this. Once I have that done, I cut my board, and this time I actually did it at HDPE. So HDPE is a very dense material, so I didn't have to worry about a lot of the warpage or any heat problems with that. I built it just basically out of a 1/2-inch piece, and then made it as big as I possibly could. I like doing this as compared to making it as small as possible. That way I have room for wiring organization or anything that we might add in the future. It's one thing to build something, very small and compact, but let's say 2 years later, like now, the customer comes back and says, I want more. Now you gotta rebuild what you did 2 years ago. I'd rather be able to say, I can reorganize this, reorientate things, and I don't have to rebuild anything. It's just easier for me. The rewire process is very meticulous. I'm very conscious of the materials I'm using. There's no reason you should be wasting wire. At it, I kind of lay things out and kind of figure out what I want to do before I even screw a single hole. So if I'm, screwing things down and I have wire laying on the board, I already know exactly how I want to do it. I already know exactly how it's going to look when it's done, just because that's already thought out through my head. This totally prevents any problems where, you wire something up and you're like, oh, I forgot to send 12 volts for this, or I forgot to send a remote wire here, and that doesn't happen for me because I literally think out this process very thoroughly. Most of the time, putting an amp rack into a car is a single person job, unless it's like a multi-amp setup and it's just very heavy. This was kind of the case. It was heavy, but it was also upside down. So imagine having, a bunch of weight suspended, and then you have wires hanging off of it in bundles, and you're trying to screw it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 mounting points while trying to hold it here and screw here, and it just doesn't work. Me and Dan actually had to go up and down like 3 or 4 times, and it was not fun either time. So if I had to say, this is the part I like about this build, that was definitely it, but that's so minor.
We had to coordinate with each other in order to hold up the amp rack. One of us hold it up while the other one screw it in. Being that we had threaded nut certs in everywhere, once you got it a little bit tightened in, we were good. We didn't have to worry about anything. And everything lined up because we planned it ahead that way. We had it mounted up though. It was pretty easy to see that this was going to work, So we were pretty stoked once it was mounted, and just seeing the amplifiers mounted up into the headliner was pretty cool. I think that was it kind of showed that we were hitting that mark we were looking for.
So running the wire, physically running the wires in the vehicle was a little bit different, because I kind of had to think about, 2 aught gauge wires are obviously not going to fit down this pillar. So there was some channels in the back of the vehicle for some taillight access that I actually was able to use. And not only did this protect the wires, but it also made it easier to run these wires down and not have to worry about any fitment of any of the factory panels or anything like that. So everything, the fit and finish was the same as it was when it came in. So there was little to no obstructions at all as far as running these wires. Most of the time, me and Dan are pretty good about we meet up at the finish line at the same time. But being that this one, I'm basically just removing and reinstalling amplifiers, I was done a lot sooner than I had anticipated. The sound deadening takes up a lot of time too, and building speaker baffles, but that was already all done. So at that point, I'm just gonna sit here and watch Dan. This sucks, I'm starting over.
I was looking at the vehicle when I was trying to come up with designs, and I saw the front grille of the vehicle. Jeep has this iconic 7 grille thing. Is it 7 all the time, or?
7 slots.
So they have the 7 slots grille pattern, which is kind of their signature thing. I wanted to take from that, but I felt like copying it exactly was too much for the amount of space that I had, and I didn't want to do tiny little grills. And the reason why I wanted to do grills in the first place was just to let some air flow. These amplifiers are fan cooled and all that kind of stuff, so the Jeep guys can totally, get on me about that, but it's a design choice. So when it comes to building trim pieces like this, the way that I approach it is to kind of go more of a structural up and then a cosmetic down. So basically I start with the base, which was my fiberglass trim piece, and then the frame, or the frame that's gonna go in there, and then the piece that insets into that, and then all my grill pieces. So then I kind of go through and I make all my grills, and then my trim piece that goes around, and set it all in everywhere it's going to be. So as I go through and make all these pieces that are going to have to flush into this entire panel, I go through and I have to tape each one individually so that it doesn't become part of the piece. You don't want to use filler and then match up to a piece of wood and then it just becomes part of it. So you have to tape it to them separate, right? It's kind of molding and stuff. Lay it all down, stick it all down, and then use body filler to mold up to each piece. Now, I try to use as little of the body filler as possible because it starts to get heavy. So there's some spots where I put little pieces of wood to kind of take up some space. A lot of times we'll use foam. In this particular panel, it just wasn't big enough it wasn't thick enough to warrant using foam for. So basically I just used a filler with a lot of fumed silica in it to kind of give it some, to make it a little bit more rigid so it's not as runny. And went through and fill it all in, start sanding it down, and it's just a back and forth of fine tuning each little spot and, you know, hand sanding and just making sure that every little bit is just contoured the way that you want it, adding more filler, sanding some off. Sometimes it's a little frustrating because you can be sanding for a while before you finally hit to the piece, that tape line where you're trying to get to.